Christopher Pyne, welcome to ABC News 24.
Thanks, Lyndal.
What's wrong with the Prime Minister's aspiration of getting Australia into the top 5 schooling nations by 2025?
Well, there's nothing wrong with an aspiration, but it isn't a policy. The problem with the government's speech today is it is a non-response to the Gonski review. Now, they've had this review since last December. It's now September, and all they've announced today is a preparedness to talk to the states and territories about a funding model. Now, what have they been doing for the entire year and the latter part of last year?
But your leader has aspirations for disability insurance, aspirations for more flexible childcare, aspirations for universal funding of dental. Are they not policies?
But we're not the government, Lyndal. The government had built up today's speech as a response to the Gonski review. Everybody expected there to be some meat on the bones, and all we got was feathers and no meat. This is a great disappointing response for the sector and for the states and territories and for parents.
But if the government had come up with something, say if the government had said we're spending this amount of money and we expect the states to contribute this much and this is what will be the plan, wouldn't you have said that the government should be consulting with the states?
Well, the government should have been consulting with the states. Ted Baillieu said this afternoon that there's been no consultation with Victoria about the Gonski review, and yet the government's had it since last December. Now, if they had come up with a policy today, if they'd put money on the table, if they'd announced the indexation rate, which we need to know, and all schools need to know going forward, the coalitions would have said, we'll look at what the government's come up with and we'll consider it. But instead, we got a blancmange from the government. We got absolutely no detail.
But haven't you said you don't want what Gonski offered, so you're not really going to consider whatever they come up with?
No, we'll consider anything the government comes up with, as any good opposition should. But we'll also hold them to account. And we need to hold them to account today for the fact that the Prime Minister's given us a speech about her early girl days, schoolgirl days at Unley High School. She's tried to tug on the heartstrings of Australians, but people expect real policy. Parents need to know how many funds are going to be going to their local school. Parents of non-government schools need to know what the fees they're going to be paying are going to be in the next 4 years. And the government has left the cupboard bare today. They've created more uncertainty, not certainty, and schools abhor uncertainty.
Do you believe that the system needs to be changed?
Well, the Gonski review has come up with a more complex system that costs $113 billion over 12 years, if indexed out between now and when the system's supposed to finish under Mr Gonski's suggestions. I think the current SES funding model does work. It's a needs-based system. It rewards private investment, i.e. in school fees, and it gets the money to where it needs to go, i.e. for those more disadvantaged schools that have low SES scores.
But under the current system, as David Gonski pointed out in his report, Australia's school rankings have been falling, and the gap between the best students and the worst students, the students doing least well, has been growing. So doesn't that point to a system that isn't doing what it should do?
Well, there was something for everything in Mr Gonski's review. Mr Gonski also said that there should be a greater focus on parental engagement, coalition policy.
Also Labor Party policy, isn't it?
They're copying our policy. He said there should be a focus on principal autonomy, on teacher quality, and on a robust school curriculum. He said those were the 4 more important determinants for the outcome of students at school than funding.
And isn't it fair to say that the Labor Party has policies on all of those?
Not
While
in
you
a
may
genuine
disagree,
way. I mean, they have nebulous policies in some of those areas. They've refused to actually say what they're going to do about teacher quality. They don't have a genuine principal autonomy policy. Western Australia has a genuine principal autonomy policy, and I'll tell you something about Western Australia. They have more than 50% of their students now in government schools, and they're in independent public schools, and they're the only state that's reversing the trend of government school parents taking their children to the local non-government school. It's actually going back the other way. Now, that's the model that the federal government should be investing in.
You just said Labor doesn't have any policy on teacher quality, but the Prime Minister outlined a number of things today, including measures to get the best and brightest into teaching, including supporting new teachers for 2 years once they move from education into the workforce.
Well, where's the money for that? I mean, this is another one of the Prime Minister's never policies. I mean, they've got the NDIS at $10.8 billion, the dental scheme's $4 billion. They've now said that they'll fund the Gonski review. the cheapest the Gonski review could be done is $26 billion over 4 years.
But the states will share some of that, won't they?
Well, the states have said that the government should fund it. The Commonwealth government should fund it.
Now, but the Commonwealth government doesn't fund all schooling at the moment. Why should the states absolve themselves of responsibility for some of that funding?
The Commonwealth does fund all schools. We fund all non-government schools. That's our principal responsibility. And we fund 10% of the AGSRC for all government schools. But the states do run the schools, and they should have a big say in the funding for those schools, and yet the Commonwealth is yet to talk to the states. Now, how could the Prime Minister come out today? This was an election policy, not an education policy, Lyndal. She came out today and said that we have a preparedness to talk to the states. But where is the detail, and where is the money coming from, and what is the indexation? Aspirations are all very well, but parents expect to know what governments are going to do for their children today and tomorrow, not in 2025.
Finally, you mentioned at your press conference that Australia should be benchmarking itself against countries like Canada. Why Canada and not Asia, the region in which Australia is?
Well, Canada is a country much more like Australia. It has a multicultural population, it has a significant Indigenous population, it has a large landmass with far-flung geographical locations. You can't compare Australia to a city-state like Singapore or Hong Kong or Shanghai and come up with a genuine comparison.
But it wasn't so long ago that Joe Hockey was saying if we talk about the Asian century in Australia, if the government talks about the Asian century, then the Asian countries are our competition and our children's competition. And we should be comparing ourselves with countries like Singapore, Korea, Vietnam and Indonesia.
Well, we should be comparing ourselves to whole systems. So rather than comparing ourselves to Shanghai or Hong Kong, we should be looking at the whole of the education outcomes for China. It's not fair for us to take simply one city and compare Australia to one city, and it's just not logical, and parents will know that the Prime Minister talking about Singapore, Hong Kong and Shanghai is not comparing apples with apples. A country like Canada is much more like Australia and a much better comparison.
And where will the Coalition find the $4.2 billion over 4 years that you've committed the Coalition to have as increased school funding?
Well, we've committed $4.2 billion at 6% indexation over the forward estimates. That's in our budget. The full details, of course, of all of our plans will be released before the election, but the Coalition is committed to $4.2 billion. It's absolutely certain we're going to have a ruthless focus on teacher quality, on principal autonomy and on a robust school curriculum, and on ending the disparity in funding of children with disabilities in schools, which at the moment is a scandal.
Christopher Pyne, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, Lyndal. Thank you.